You and I are such similar creatures, Vivian. We both screw people for money.
The 1990 classic Pretty Woman not only launched Julia Roberts' career, it also became the highest grossing romantic comedy of all time. Owed in no small part to the chemistry between its romantic leads, Vivian and Edward, played by Julia Roberts and Richard Gere. And believe it or not, it was actually a Disney movie.
What?
You heard me. Touchstone was the adult division of Disney and they bought that shit. Julia Roberts is so charming and likable in this role, and Richard Gere be staring so deeply into this gal's eyes that it almost makes sense to us by the time she slips up and tells him she loves him after just a few days of being hired to service him. Pretty Woman is the kind of movie that lives or dies by the on-screen chemistry between its romantic leads, because baby, the facts on paper, it ain't no kind of love story at all. Not at all. Which is actually why it wasn't intended to be when J.F. Lawson wrote the original script, which was based on a story a real sex worker he'd known had told him about her life, where the man had simply left in the end after wining and dining her in Vegas for a week. The original script was actually named 3000, which spoke to what the movie was truly about at its core. Money. Specifically, the $3,000 Edward paid Vivian for a week together, which we will talk about later. And it was a much darker movie, but Hollywood gotta sell its dream, so changes were made. 3000 became Pretty Woman, and Vivian and Edward ended up together. And they made the right call. Do not mind the cold hard facts that I'm going to point out throughout this video. I'm just a girl. So I couldn't and still cannot resist the chemistry between Julia Roberts and Richard Gere either. Pretty Woman is a classic for a reason. It might not truly be a love story when you peel back the layers and look at the facts on paper, but when you look at the visual storytelling, it was a love story that was flawlessly told in a few ways. The way they used Vivian's wardrobe as a storytelling device to move the story in their relationship along and created some of the most iconic outfits in pop culture history, as well as how they used the concept of them not kissing on the lips because it was too intimate to illustrate the moment when they fell in love without having to say it, was also mwah, chef's kiss. So let me be clear, we are not critiquing the movie Pretty Woman. It is an excellent movie. We are unpacking the themes in Pretty Woman, which are deeply, deeply steeped in traditional ideas of what it means to be a lady, modesty, class, being saved by rich men, and other patriarchal bullshit. I say, I was rooting for Vivian and Edward in my heart, but my mind never lost sight of the fact that this is not the love story it was sold to us as. Roll the theme song, Aaron.
Black independent, strongest in women. It's Olay, it's Olay, it's Olay, it's Olay now. I know that I'm worth it, so make sure to listen. It's Olay, it's Olay, it's Olay, it's Olay.
The plot to Pretty Woman is simple. A filthy rich goes to Hollywood Boulevard and hires a sex worker who he takes to his hotel. They f that night and he decides to pay her to stay with him for a week, at which point he wines and dines her, they fall in love and get together in the end. But that's a hell of an oversimplification. The first thing I want to establish is that Edward is not a good No, yeah, shoot me with your bacon. He is a very rich He's a very good looking He is not a very good Not only does Edward accrue his wealth by purchasing people's hard-built companies and selling them for scraps and laying off their employees in order to appease the angry boy inside of him who's still mad at his daddy for choosing his company over fatherhood. So he went into that line of work so he could buy and dismantle his father's company.
Well, my name is Mr. Lewis. I'm very angry with my father. My father was president of the third company I ever took over. And bought it. I sold it off piece by piece.
What'd the shrink say?
So I was cured.
Well, so you got even. That must have made you happy.
In the original script for Pretty Woman, before J.F. Lawson had set out to create a romantic comedy and give us a relationship that Disney could root for, Edward's wicked-ass job was actually central to the plot. Lawson said he'd wanted to get one of those guys that was destroying the Rust Belt, Edward, and have him meet someone whose circumstances were a direct result of what he was doing in the Rust Belt. And yes, the spirit of this reality remains in the film if you care to see it, but it's never named or focused on, because it would paint Edward in the appropriate bad light. Instead, what we got was him flexing his wealth, his plan to buy and dismantle another company as he's been doing his entire career, and that's how he accrued said wealth. Vivian never saying too much about it one way or the next, let alone objecting, and him deciding to save one company seemingly is the result of an impact on him, and we're supposed to feel like that redeemed him from something he was never truly indicted for in the film.
Stop the cap. cap.
But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to the beginning. When we meet Edward, we learn that his live-in girlfriend was in the process of moving out of their home in New York City because he's such an absent piece of shit partner who prioritizes his work. His ex-wife had divorced him for the same reasons, and he runs into another ex-girlfriend who confirms what the latest ex-girlfriend had said to him about being made to have a closer relationship with his assistant than with him. So we know what kind of is off the rip. A man who leads with money and do not emotionally invest nor care about his gals. Evidenced again by the fact that his current gal was mid-moving out and he didn't give a Instead, he hopped in his lawyer car to go pick up a sex worker on Hollywood Boulevard. And there's something we should establish about the way they meet and what we're meant to think about them. We are made to think that Edward, who has voluntarily chosen to take his lawyer's car and go driving, has no idea how to get where he's going, and stops on Hollywood Boulevard, at which point he allows a sex worker to jump in his car for the sole purpose of getting directions from her.
Stop the cap.
And it's made clear to us through Vivian's friend Kat's coachings and her uneasiness approaching him initially that we're supposed to believe Vivian hasn't been doing sex work for very long. That's why Kit has to tell her what to charge. And both these things are intentional, because Pretty Woman is a perfect example of how Hollywood tries to do something taboo or that goes against the grain or these kind of conservative notions, like making a sex worker the love interest who gets to live happily ever after with the handsome rich man, but they're still not convinced they could sell the public on that or get you to root for that outright. So the sex worker still has to be as innocent as a sex worker could be. A new sex worker. Someone who just started doing this when her boyfriend broke up with her and she couldn't afford her rent but was too ashamed to go back home, so she started doing sex work at her roommate's suggestion, because there needs to feel like there's still some purity or innocence left to save. And the desirable man can't be desirable anymore if we think he consciously or regularly paid for sex. So they need to set up a scenario where he just stumbles into this opportunity to invite a sex worker into his car, take it to his hotel that night and hire her for a week.
That's suspicious. That's weird.
Despite the fact that our love interest is this sex worker, we're still not allowed to see like the humanity. They still make sure that at no point do you think they are taking a pro-sex work position. And this isn't just my speculation or deductive reasoning. It's reality. In the original script J.F. Lawson wrote, before Disney bought the movie, Edward was outright cheating on his girlfriend, and they were a lot less coy about his selfishness and manipulativeness. So much so, in fact, that Richard Gere originally passed on the movie repeatedly because Edward was just so unlikable. And Vivian was originally supposed to be on drugs and had been doing sex work for 6 years already when she meets Edward. But none of that worked for what Disney was ultimately trying to sell. A live-action fairy tale, only this time the backdrop is sex work. So what we get, as far as I'm concerned, is Edward pretending to stumble into hiring a sex worker and then continuing the charade of acting like he doesn't usually do this by assuming Vivian's dental floss must be drugs and immediately trying to grip her the up and throw out the hotel because he didn't order drugs with his sex. This whole he's not like the other guys who pay for sex angle is one of the first of many ways the movie tries to trick us out of using our common sense. But the second and more important way the movie tricked us brings me back to my earlier point that Edward is a filthy rich but he's not a good. Let me tell y'all how we know Edward ain't shit. I knew Edward wasn't shit the moment Edward, a multi-millionaire who spends the movie's runtime trying to bet yet another billion-dollar company he can sell for scraps and spending mad bread on whatever, told the sex worker he's hired that her rate of $100 an hour is stiff.
This guy stinks!
Then I knew Edward was a wicked son of a bitch when he asked to pay her at her hourly rate to spend a week with him, then haggled her down from her $4,000 ass to $3,000. Your girl is not a mathematician, but I do have a calculator. Break out the calculator, Aaron. If this girl rate is $100 an hour and there's 24 hours in a day and he wants her for 6 days, that's $14,400. $14,400. And that mother know that. But rather than pay her what he knows the price is, which is chump change to this rich bitch, he makes her negotiate. And when she lowballs herself and asks for $4,000 because she's a broke ass sex worker behind on her rent who cannot fathom asking the man who told her that $100 was stiff for $14,400, this man lowballs her again and says no, $3,000.
You raggedy bitch.
But my poor girl running around feeling so grateful for the possibility of the $3,000 because of the financial position she's in, she doesn't even process that this robbing her of $11,400. She ain't even feel no kind of way all the times he was dropping numbers on all the far more expensive things he was paying for. Because my girl couldn't even consider asking for it because she doesn't think she's worth it, which is something the movie makes sure that we know. They lean completely in to the beautiful woman who doesn't know her worth till a rich man shows it to her and saves her trope. They have my girl actively speaking in princess metaphors about being rescued.
It could be so much more.
People put you down enough, you start to believe it.
I think you are a very bright, very special woman.
The bad stuff is easier to believe. You ever notice that?
And it wasn't just that he lowballed her, which did tell me what he was and how he moved from the jump. It was also the need he felt to say that she was his employee.
Yes, I'd like to hire you as an employee.
He paid a sex worker for sex, but because of how it makes him feel to be paying for sex, he needs to reframe the dynamics into something that makes him feel big again, where she can feel subservient, which is why he insists on calling her his employee when she is nothing of the sort. At no point does paying a sex worker for sex make them your employee. You think he mentioning that $3,000 in the company taxes? You think that getting reported? You think he reporting that as a business expense?
I don't care who the IRS sends, I am not paying taxes.
It's just how he makes himself the big businessman again, rather than just a man paying for a sex. It's a way for him to establish and exert even more control over her. We're supposed to feel like Edward and Vivian are falling in love, and we do. I ain't gonna lie, because those could act. But let's assess what was actually happening though, not just how they was making us feel about it. Edward needs a date for his business meeting, so he tells her go buy some new clothes so she don't look like a whore. The sales girl refused to sell her those clothes because she thought she looked like a whore, even though my girl just looked like a bad bitch to me. But nevertheless, our girl spends the entire day being treated like all kinds of bitches and whores while Edward is busy working, which is no different than his other relationship. The part where Edward is busy working, I mean, not like the bitches and whores part. Then, after a long day of being denied the right to shop, the hotel manager, who's played by an actor that I love. Every time I see him, I get happy. But the hotel manager starts lecturing her about how ain't no hoes allowed in this hotel before eventually taking a liking to her and helping her buy a dress. Then, when Edward finds out how she was treated by the sales girls, he goes down there, but he doesn't actually check anyone or address how she was treated or why. He just gets them to kiss their ass by saying he was gonna spend a shit ton of money in there.
That's why when you came in here,
You know what we're going to
knew
do here?
from the first.
We're going to need a few more people helping us out. I'll tell you why. We're going to be spending an obscene amount of money in here. We're going to need a lot more help sucking up to us because that's what we really like.
Whoa.
You understand that?
And how much you want bet the offensive amount of money he spent was more than $3,000? Anyway, I think this is an important moment to illustrate because it's illustrative of a problem that will reoccur. Edward never actually goes all the way when it comes to standing up for her. In part because his line of thinking isn't much different than the people mistreating her. And in part because he hadn't decided whether she was even worth the trouble. And we see that when he takes her to an event and when his hating ass, overzealous ass attorney Philip starts questioning whether she's a spy from the company they're trying to buy because he saw her talking to the young company. And that's when Edward puts her on Front Street.
She's not a spy. She is a hooker. She is a hooker. I picked her up on Hollywood Boulevard in your car.
And even if you wanted to give him a pass for this, like, oh, he was just trying to calm his lawyer down. When the lawyer Philip then goes over to Vivian and makes a really offensive, disrespectful pass at her, and she gets rightfully upset and tells Edward, this is how this gives it up.
I hate to point out the obvious, but you are in fact a hooker, and you are my employee.
You don't own me, I decide, okay? I say who, I say when, I say who!
I refuse to spend the next 3 days fighting with you. I said I was sorry, I meant it. That's the end of it.
I'm sorry I ever met you.
As if you had so many more appealing options.
Hell no, man.
Then, when she tries to leave and asks for the money he owes her, he tosses it down to solidify the respect he doesn't have for her. And how was this remedied by the movie? He follows her to the elevator and tells her he's sorry. He was mad because she was talking to the other and they go to the opera. Okay? We're supposed to find this endearing because she does. Because the pick-me logic is a man gets jealous when he likes you. So you're supposed to disregard what we now know he really thinks of her because he's telling he has feelings for her. This is how he's beginning to swing. Because I need y'all to understand that Edward's piece of shit lawyer friend Philip is a direct reflection of Edward. Beyond the fact that birds of a feather flock together and Philip would not do anything he didn't feel comfortable Edward would be okay with, that's the man boss. It's demonstrated several times. Because when Philip disrespects Vivian the first time and she complains, Edward's response to Vivian is basically, well, the guys worked for me for 10 years and well, you are a hooker. And even after Edward and Vivian get in a fight over it, Edward still is not going to correct Philip. He goes into work the next day, and it's only when Philip mentions Vivian another time and calls her a hooker that Edward simply says, careful. Then finally, when Philip walks into his boss penthouse hotel and tries to rape Vivian and full on physically assaults her, slapped the shit out of this woman. It's then that Edward punches him and yells at him. But two things are important in this scene for understanding who Edward really is at his core. Number one, just like Edward had yelled at Vivian, Philip has been working for him for 10 years to defend Philip's original sexual advance at her. When Edward gets mad this time, Philip yells at Edward the same thing, that he's been with him 10 years. These think the same. That's the reason that Philip even felt like he could do something like that and get away with it. And it's the reason he wasn't inclined to reprimand Philip earlier, because he knows the only reason that he has an objection to how Philip is moving is because he happens to have feelings for Vivian, not because he truly sees her differently, which is why he had quickly defaulted to reminding her she was just a hooker the moment it benefited him too. And number two, Edward didn't fire Philip. He punched him, he threw him out, but he didn't fire him. That's a rich white man, and he ain't even called the police on him for beating and attempting to rape this woman we're supposed to believe he loves. He ain't so much as threatened to tell Philip's wife. What does that tell y'all? We're supposed to feel like love has changed Edward as a man because he quite literally touches grass, doesn't sell one company for parts, takes some cheap flowers to Vivian's apartment, and climbs the fire escape despite his fear of heights. Although he'd been subjecting himself to heights the entire movie via his penthouse and balcony seats at the opera because his desire to look like the richest in the room was always greater than his fear of heights. And like I said, I loved the movie, so I was rooting for Vivian and Edward in my heart, but my brain knew better. That man did not become a new or good overnight. He's not only going to neglect her like he did his ex-wife and ex-girlfriends, he's also going to revert to demeaning her when the opportunity presents itself, just like he'd done the morning of his big romantic gesture.
I've never treated you like a prostitute.
You just did.
That was his response to her because she'd refused his offer of nothing romantically substantive, just an apartment and money. Although, let's be real, I'm talking all this shit, she absolutely shouldn't refuse. How else our girl was gonna make it out of poverty with an hour and a half runtime? Because contrary to what dream she was selling herself at the end there, $3,000 was not a life-changing amount of money, not even in 1990, baby. But back to the point. It wasn't like he only demeaned her when he was angry. It was something he'd done casually that morning. And not only did he demean her, he gaslit her. Because what the f you mean you never treated her like a hooker? You called her a hooker with no better options 2 nights ago at maximum.
You are, in fact, a hooker.
And it's not like this gets addressed or corrected. He doesn't tell her about his philosophical change and how he views sex workers. She simply whispers to herself as he leaves, and the next time they're together is when she's leaving, and the time after that, he's declaring his intent to rescue her.
So what happened after? He climbed up the tower and rescued her.
She rescues him right back.
And the movie ends on this note that they rescued each other. But no, what happened in this movie was a wealthy man got tired of women leaving him because he neglected them and decided to pay a woman he could call his employee so he could have a relationship with her on his terms. And because this considerably younger woman who had dropped out of high school, became impoverished, was now doing sex work, struggling to pay rent, and had expressed that she had low self-esteem and came from an at least emotionally abusive home where her mom told her all she attracted was bums, how could she not fall in love with the rich who could make all her problems go away, even if the price might be her self-respect? This wasn't a love story. It was a story about money, what you could do with money and what you had to do when you didn't have money. Which is why, in J.F. Lawson's original script, we don't get a happy ending where Edward and Vivian run off and be together. Instead, in the original ending, true to his words in the actual movie,
Baby, I'm gonna treat you so nice, you're never gonna wanna let me go.
3,000 for 6 days. And Vivian, I will let you go.
Edward drops Vivian right back off where he picked her up on Hollywood Boulevard. And when they get into an argument because she doesn't want to go, he drags out the car, tries to give her the money, and she refuses to take it. So he drops the money on the floor and pulls off. Then she scrambles to get the money off the ground because homeless folk are trying to come get it. And she and Kit take the $3,000, get on a bus, and go to Disneyland together. That was the original ending. But neither Disney nor Hollywood was going for that. So instead, they went with Edward and Vivian living happily ever after. Although, none was no-go, so